Dawn broke cold on March 15, 1868. The house servants entered the master bedroom at Oakwood Plantation and found a scene no one expected. William, the colonel's only son, knelt on the pine floorboards, gripping the hands of Elijah. The slave, who served as his personal attendant, they weren't crying, they weren't shouting, they just stared at each other with an intensity that made the air feel thick as molasses. But it wasn't the strange position that shocked those who entered that room. It was the phrase Elijah spoke in a calm voice, almost indifferent, as he freed his hands from the young master's desperate grip. "This ain't punishment, sir. This is just the end of something you never truly controlled." In that instant, William understood what had taken him 8 years to see. He was not the master. He never had been. And Elijah, the man he believed he owned, was the only one who'd always known the truth about their impossible bond. Before we continue, make sure you're subscribed to the channel and write in the comments what country you're watching from. What you're about to hear, the history books tried to bury. Oakwood Plantation, Georgia, August 1860. August heat fell on the cotton fields like a curse. The smell of fermenting sorghum mixed with slave sweat and the cloying perfume of magnolia blossoms growing around the big house. It was late afternoon when the wagon arrived, carrying the last shipment of slaves purchased at the Savannah market. William was 14 and watched from the veranda, more out of boredom than interest. His father, Colonel Ashford of Oakwood, examined the newcomers with the eyes of a man appraising livestock. But it was in that moment William saw Elijah for the first time. He was 18, skin the color of dark honey, hands too fine for heavy labor. His eyes didn't lower like the others. He looked straight ahead with a serenity that seemed to defy fate itself. There was something different about him, something that made people look away, uncomfortable without knowing why. "That one ain't good for the fields," the overseer muttered. "Look at those hands, like a woman's." The colonel agreed with a grunt. "Put him in the house, let him learn some trade." But William couldn't look away. He felt a strange pang in his chest, a curiosity he couldn't name. For the first time in his life, he wanted to know someone, wanted to understand what lay behind that impossible calm. That same night, the colonel decided, "Elijah's going to be your personal servant. Time you learned how to handle the Negroes. Command him. Teach him to serve you proper." William nodded, but inside something stirred. It wasn't the sense of power his father expected. It was something else, something that would take him years to understand. When Elijah first entered William's room to arrange clothes and prepare the wash basin for bathing, there was a heavy silence. The heir tried to speak with authority, the way he saw his father do it. "Can you read?" Elijah lifted his eyes briefly. "Yes, sir." "Who taught you?" "The mistress from the plantation where I was born. Before she died." William sat on the edge of the bed, forgetting his authoritative pose. "And what do you read?" "Whatever they let me, sir." There was something in Elijah's voice. It wasn't submission, it was patience, as if waiting for the right moment for something only he knew. That night, William didn't sleep. He kept thinking about the short answers, the calm voice, the eyes that didn't completely bow, and for the first time in his spoiled young life he felt he'd found someone who truly saw him. What he didn't know was that calm gaze concealed 8 years of waiting. Elijah knew exactly what was coming. And unlike William, he never deceived himself about who really controlled this story. The following months transformed the routine of the big house. William, who'd previously spent days between tedious lessons with his private tutor and rides around the plantation grounds, began finding excuses to stay in his room. There was always something Elijah needed to tidy, a garment to fold, a book to fetch from the colonel's library, a conversation that started about nothing and ended in silences too long. At first, William tried to maintain the master's pose. He gave curt orders, feigned indifference. But Elijah responded with an obedience so serene it seemed like mockery. He fulfilled everything to the letter, but always with that look that said, "I know what you really want." One January night in 1861, when the heat was so intense, even linen sheets brought no relief, William asked Elijah to read to him. It was a weak pretext, but Elijah didn't question it. He sat in a chair beside the bed and began reading a French novel the colonel had brought from Charleston. His voice had a strange musicality. It wasn't the voice of one who serves, it was the voice of one who chooses to serve, and in that subtle difference lay all the power. "Why don't you try to run?" William suddenly asked, interrupting the reading. Elijah closed the book slowly. "Where would I run to, sir?" "North, to the cities. They say there are people who help. And what would I do there?" "You'd be free." Elijah smiled. It was the first time William saw that smile and felt the ground disappear beneath his feet. Freedom ain't just having no chains, sir. Sometimes a man chooses to stay because there's something worth more than running. What could be worth more? Elijah held William's gaze too long. I don't know if you're ready for that answer yet. The phrase hung in the hot night air. William felt his heart race, felt fear and desire at once, and for the first time understood he wasn't giving orders. He was being led. The nightly readings became rituals. Then came conversations. William spoke of his fears, his father's pressure, the life he hadn't chosen. Elijah listened with infinite patience, and when he spoke, his words were precise as blades. You're afraid of being who you are, he said one night, but running from yourself don't work. A man always finds himself in the end. And you, what are you afraid of? Nothing, sir. When you've already lost everything, there's nothing left to fear. But it was a lie. Elijah feared only one thing, that William would realize too soon. Because if the boy understood the game before its time, everything would collapse. He needed William to believe he was in control until the exact moment he could no longer live without that illusion. Years passed. William grew, became a man. But he kept needing those nights, those conversations, that presence that made him feel complete in a way he couldn't explain to anyone. In 1864, when he turned 18, the colonel began talking about marriage. There were girls from good families, alliances to make, but William rejected every proposal with vague excuses. It's not time yet, he'd say. I need to take better care of the plantation first. The truth was different. He couldn't imagine life without Elijah, couldn't sleep without hearing that voice reading, couldn't breathe without knowing that at dawn that calm gaze would be there, waiting. And Elijah knew each need, each silent dependency growing like creeping vine, and he waited. One dawn in 1866, William woke trembling. He dreamed Elijah was leaving, escaping, disappearing. He called for him in the dark, voice broken with panic. Elijah appeared in the doorway, holding a candle. You called, sir. You won't leave, will you? Promise you won't. There was a long pause. Elijah entered the room and closed the door, placed the candle on the nightstand, and sat on the bed's edge. Why would I leave, sir? I don't know. Just don't. Elijah extended his hand, and for the first time in 6 years touched William's face. It was a light touch, almost paternal. I'll stay as long as you need me. And in that instant, something changed. William held that hand, not as master, like a drowning man finding driftwood. I need you, he whispered. I need you. Elijah didn't answer, just stayed there, hand caught between the heir's trembling hands. And when the candle finished burning, they remained in darkness, knowing they'd crossed an invisible line they could never erase. Outside the door, Sarah, the big house's head servant, listened in silence. She saw, she knew, and she stored each secret like ammunition for a war not yet begun. Sarah was 40 years old and had worked in the big house since girlhood. She knew every corner of that house, every secret, every lie buried beneath the waxed floorboards. She knew when the mistress drank in secret. She knew about the colonel's bastard children scattered through the quarters. She knew everything, and kept silent. But what was happening between William and Elijah was different. It wasn't just sin, it was dangerous. For months, she observed, saw how the young master became distraught when Elijah took too long to arrive, how he trembled when the slave spoke, how his eyes followed him through the corridors like following an apparition. And Elijah? He was an enigma, never rushed anything, never demanded, just existed, with that calm that seemed to control time around him. It was in April 1867 that Sarah decided to speak, not with the colonel, that would be Elijah's death, but with William himself. She waited for an afternoon when Elijah had gone to town for supplies, entered the heir's room with the excuse of changing linens. Can I say something, young master? William barely looked up from his book. Speak. You need to be careful. Now he looked. Careful about what? Sarah lowered her voice. About Elijah. William's face stiffened. Explain. People are starting to notice. The way you look at him. How he stays here late. How you won't marry. It's nobody's business. Yes, it is, sir. Everything that happens in this house becomes talk. And talk becomes scandal. And scandal. She paused, choosing words. Scandal kills. William stood, trying to appear firm. Elijah is my servant. I command him. If I want him to stay late, he stays. Sarah stared at him with that weary wisdom of one who'd lived too long. Do you truly believe you command him? The question fell like cold water. Of course I do. Then why can't you send him away? Silence. Why can't you go one day without him? William stepped back, leaning against the wall. I can, I just don't want to. No, sir, you can't, and he knows it. Sarah's words echoed through the following week. William tried to prove her wrong, spent 2 days without calling Elijah, ate alone, slept alone, read alone. On the 3rd day, he was destroyed, pale, trembling. When Elijah entered to tidy the room, William nearly threw himself at him. Where were you? You didn't call me, sir. But I needed... Elijah placed a hand on his shoulder, a simple gesture, almost fraternal. I know. And it was in that moment William understood the truth Sarah had tried to show him. He controlled nothing. The dependency wasn't Elijah's on him, it was his on Elijah, and that dependency was so deep it terrified him. What did you do to me? He asked, voice strangled. Elijah smiled, that sad smile holding 8 years of patience. Nothing you didn't want me to do. But the conversation was interrupted. The door burst open. Colonel Ashford entered like a tempest, Sarah behind him, pale. Father, The colonel raised his hand, silencing him. His eyes went straight to Elijah. Get out. Elijah bowed his head and left in silence. The door closed. The colonel walked to the window, back to his son, stayed like that a long time, controlling his breathing. Sarah told me everything. William felt the world crumble. Father, it's not what... Shut your mouth. The voice was cold as ice. You think I'm blind? Think I don't see how you look at that Negro like you depend on him to breathe? I don't... Shut your mouth. The shout echoed off the walls. You're 22 years old, heir to this plantation, should be married with children, building a name, and instead you're here like a dog behind a slave. The words cut like razors. He'll be sold tomorrow. William's heart stopped. No, Father, please don't. It's decided. Going to the Savannah market, and you're going to learn to be a man once and for all. William fell to his knees. Literally. Fell right there on the bedroom floor and began to cry. It wasn't a child's crying. It was pure desperation. Father, I'm begging you. Do what you want with me. Take away my inheritance. Send me away. But don't sell him. The colonel turned, looking at his son with a mixture of disgust and pity. Get up from there. You look like a woman. I can't live without him. And it was that phrase, spoken between sobs on the floor without any dignity, that sealed everything. The colonel understood he'd lost his son, not to another man, to an illusion of control that never existed. Tomorrow morning, he said, leaving, and if you try anything, I'll have him whipped to death. When the door closed, William stayed there, alone, broken, and finally realized how much he was enslaved by what he thought he possessed. Dawn came cold. William didn't sleep. Sat on the bed's edge, staring at the door, waiting. He knew Elijah would come, had to say goodbye, and he came. Entered without knocking, as he always did, but this time he brought no breakfast tray, brought nothing, just entered and stood there, illuminated by the lamp's weak light. You knew, William said, not looking at him. You knew it would end this way. I knew. From the beginning? From the beginning. William raised his head. His eyes were swollen from crying. Then why did you stay? Why didn't you run when you could? Elijah walked slowly until he stood facing him. For the first time in 8 years, he was the one who lowered his eyes. Because I needed it too. The words fell like a bomb. Needed what? To know I existed. To be seen, to be more than a body working. Elijah breathed deeply. You gave me that. Gave me a name. Gave me a voice. Made me feel human. William stood, trembling. But I used you. Kept you prisoner here. No, sir. Elijah held his face with both hands. You never imprisoned me. I chose to stay, because for the first time in my life, someone looked at me and saw more than a slave. But I believed I commanded you, that I controlled you. I know. You let me believe that. I did. Why? Elijah smiled. That sad smile William would carry the rest of his life. Because you needed to believe it to allow yourself to feel. If you'd known the truth from the start, that you were the one who depended on me, you'd have run. Would have denied everything. Tears flowed down William's face again. I'm a coward. No, you're human, and you had courage few have. What courage? I couldn't even protect you. The courage to allow yourself to love what the world told you to hate. They stood there facing each other, knowing this was goodbye, knowing when the sun rose, everything would end. If I could, William said, I'd free you, give you everything, run away with you. But you can't. I can't. Elijah pressed his forehead to William's. This ain't punishment, sir. This is just the end of something you never truly controlled. The phrase echoed in the room's silence. I love you, William whispered. I know. And you? Elijah pulled away slowly, looking at him one last time. I always knew it would end this way, but I don't regret nothing. He left without looking back. And when the door closed, William collapsed. Dawn broke. The colonel sent for Elijah. He went without resistance. William tried to follow but was stopped by the overseer's men. He screamed, begged. It didn't help. When the wagon carrying Elijah disappeared down the dusty road, William felt something die inside him. It wasn't love. It was the illusion that he'd ever had control over anything. Sarah found him 3 days later, still in the room, not eating, not speaking, just staring at the door, waiting for someone who'd never return. He was right, William murmured. I never commanded anything. I was the slave. Sarah knelt beside him. No, sir. You were both slaves, one to chains, the other to fear. But at least for a time you were free to each other. 20 years passed. In 1888, when emancipation finally came, William was 42, never married, never had children. Took over the plantation when his father died, but managed everything with indifference. They said he was strange, that he'd spend hours staring at nothing, that sometimes at night he talked alone as if someone were there. Sarah, now old, still worked at the house, and it was she who received the letter. It came from Atlanta, no return address, just a name written in firm handwriting, Elijah. She took it to William's room without saying anything, handed him the letter, and left. William stared at the envelope for hours. When he finally opened it, there was only one sentence. Thank you for teaching me that control is illusion, but feeling is real. I never forgot. No signature, no address, just those words. William kept the letter in a locked drawer, and for the first time in 20 years he smiled. It wasn't a happy ending. There was no reunion, no redemption, but there was understanding. Elijah was alive, free, and still remembered. And William finally understood that those 8 years hadn't been about possession. They'd been about recognition. 2 men imprisoned by different chains, one by slavery, the other by fear, who for a brief moment freed each other. The world never knew their story. There was no public scandal, no bloody tragedy. There were just 2 men who learned, each in his own way, that true love isn't about control. It's about allowing yourself to be transformed. And you? Would you have the courage to recognize when the control you think you have is just an illusion? Would you dare admit you depend on someone society says you should only command? Write in the comments what you thought of this story.